I guess you could have figured out by now, the dyno day didn't go as planned. So in this video, I'm gonna show you how much power the truck made with all the new parts and what that means for your stock drivetrain. Okay, I've got a confession to make. That last video you just saw was not the final dyno pool of this truck. Unfortunately, I had asked the tuner here at the shop locally to let me know when he started doing power pools. Initially, he was just doing some modifications to the base table, and I didn't want to be in the shop filming and being rude, so I just, let him do his thing. Once I heard him start to do some pools, I went out to the shop. Unfortunately, I got out there on the third or fourth pool that he was making, set up my camera, thought I hit play, watched the truck. It sounded great at about what I would find out later, about 5,500, 5,600 RPM. All of a sudden, the truck hit the rev limiter. I saw a fireball come out of the exhaust. I just thought he hit the rev limiter, but then I heard that noise. That noise that you watch dyno videos, is what happens when you snap a drive shaft and the other part does a crazy daisy and smashes into your brand new exhaust that you just installed, puts a hole in the new floor that you just patched. So that was the end of that. So what did I pick up? Well, take a look at the graph here. Initially the numbers weren't exactly what I was hoping for, but after I really started to look through and analyze the data and understand that my motor only makes, I think, 8.5, somewhere between 8.4 and 8.6 to 1 compression. And when you buy the kit, Edelbrock tells you that this makes 540 horsepower on an engine dyno with 9.6 to 1. If you look at the dyno sheet, the first lower two graphs are the baseline pools. So that was with pretty much everything stock cam. As we found out, it had slightly modified cylinder heads and 1.72 to 1 ratio comp rockers. The new kit that I installed had a 1.7 rocker, so you lost a little bit of rocker arm ratio, but you totally made up for that with both the cylinder head and the hydraulic roller cam. So, by the numbers, picked up 107, 108 wheel horsepower and 20 foot-pounds of torque at the tires. So that equates to 434 horsepower and roughly 480 foot-pounds of torque. Now, if you assume roughly 15% drivetrain loss, which I think is fair for a manual transmission, that comes out to roughly 510 horsepower and 565 foot-pounds of torque. Now, when you look at that and compare it to the 540 and 539 that Edelbrock claims, but you subtract a whole point of compression, I think that's right where it should be. It is surprising that it makes peak power at 5,500 and then starts to taper off. Everything this kit says is it's good for 6,500 RPM, but as you can see, we never got anywhere close to that. So I don't know if that has to do with compression ratio. I don't think it has to do with any sort of breathing. I mean, the Holly Sniper is roughly, I think, 880 CFM. So you could have potentially got away with a little bit larger carburetor or intake. But if you do the math and you look at RPM and you look at horsepower, I think that's more than enough CFM for what we're doing. As you know, I've got the 3-inch exhaust. The headers are a 1 3/4 inch, so potentially you could maybe pick up if you went to a 1 7/8 or a 2-inch primary. But either way, I think all in all, anytime you can pick up roughly 110 wheel horsepower with bolt-on upgrades, that's a total win. The other big thing to look at here is the area under the curve. So I took the dyno graph, I put everything in Excel, did a little bit of math, and now you can look at what your average gains are. So average area and horsepower and torque, area under the curve, compare that to the old versus new. Unfortunately, I can't give you driving impressions because as you saw, I broke the drive shaft. I'm a little bit surprised by this. I had a local drive shaft shop rebalance my stock drive shaft. So this is the stock 1981 C10 drive shaft. when I put on the new QuickTime bell housing in T56, that spaced everything back a little bit, so I had to have the drive shaft shortened. So I went to the drive shaft shop, they took this one, cut it, re-welded it, shortened it, gave me new Spicer 1310 U-joints. These are the greasable kind. They're also not, they're pressed in, they don't have the clips on the end, but I don't think that was the problem. I think the problem was critical speed. So I believe for this size drive shaft at that RPM, that was the critical speed, meaning once you get above that point or stay at that point for any length of time, you get a ton of vibration, you get heat, and ultimately you get a quick failure of the drive shaft, which is what we saw. If you look, they failed, I mean, pretty much identically in the center. If you take these and you line them up end to end perfectly, it's right in the center. And also, if you look at the, if you take a look here, I went and took this to the drive shaft shop. They were saying this paint flaking off is actually probably a sign of heat. So it got hot right before it broke. They think it's a critical speed failure. So obviously I have some work to do. I'm looking into steel drive shafts. I'm looking into aluminum drive shafts. I've got 5 inches between both of my mufflers, so I'm a little bit constrained there. I can't go to, like, say, a 5-inch drive shaft or even a 4-inch drive shaft. I don't think that would leave me enough room. So I'm gonna look at 3 and 3.5-inch drive shafts. I've been in contact with the local drive shaft shop, Strange Engineering, Shaft Masters, DSS, so all the big names in drive shafts. I'm looking at them. Probably gonna go with an aluminum drive shaft, probably 3.5-inch, but what's gonna be key is critical speed. So I wanna make sure that my critical speed gives me enough headroom so that down the road, I decide that I want to rev this thing out. I have, let's say higher compression, I have, whatever, something totally different. I wanna give myself enough factor of safety so that at 5,500, 6,000 RPM, I'm not worried about failure. I'd like to see the critical speed somewhere in the 6,500 to 7,000 RPM range. Torque won't be an issue looking at everything that the companies are telling me. You've got way more factor of safety, 1,000 foot-pounds plus for torque. It's the speed that's key. So I'm gonna try and get a good price on that, and obviously I'll have more videos on what type of drive shaft I choose. The other big thing that I wanna look at here is the U-joints. So with a drive shaft, there are different styles of U-joints. These are made by Spicer. This is a 1310 series. The 1310 series, from the little bit of research that I've done, is what's standard on half-ton trucks. So you jump up to maybe 3/4 ton, definitely 1 ton. Now you're looking at a minimum of 1350 series. So what that means is they get longer, and also the diameter gets larger. So if you measure this 1310, you're gonna get a beefier unit with a 1350. From what I've seen, most drag racers, people who go out and make more power, they run the 1350. I believe the 1310 is rated for, and I'll post this in the video, but I believe it's rated for 400 foot-pounds of continuous torque, whatever that means, and 800 foot-pounds of maximum torque. So my motor making, and now you've got to think of it not at the wheels, but flywheel, mine is making 565 foot-pounds. So that's not continuous, but that's way more than the 400 that the 1310 series is rated for. If you jump up to the 1350 series, it's rated for, I want to say, 500 or 550 foot-pounds of continuous torque and 1,000 foot-pounds of maximum torque. So I think the 1350 is going to be key. The problem here is when you decide to jump up to the larger one, obviously at the transmission side, you can easily get that changed. Not a huge deal. However, my rear end, the stock GM 12 bolt, which most of you guys probably have if you have an old muscle car or a truck, has the 1310 style pinion flange, meaning if I get a beefier drive shaft with that larger 1350, it won't bolt up. The new one will be too big. So you've got to replace the pinion flange. So what I'm thinking is, while it's out of commission, I'm gonna redo the rear gears. I'm gonna take apart the rear end, look inside the rear end, and then while I'm at it, replace that pinion flange with the larger size. The other thing with this truck being the T56 at highway speeds, meaning in Utah here, that's 70 miles an hour, 80 miles an hour is the speed limit. You run into it actually being too low of RPM. You kind of feel like you're lugging the truck. Now, when they did the tune, they also added, I think he added 2 degrees of timing almost anywhere, so that might help, but at 75 miles an hour, you're roughly 1350, 1400 RPM. It doesn't sound that low for a big block, but remember too, you lose low end torque when you have a larger cam like this. So I think I'm gonna jump up to like a 411 gear set, which will help me on the highway. It'll get me more in the range that you'd wanna be at, especially since this thing now redlines at 5,500 RPM, let's call it. If it was running at 2,000 RPM on the freeway, that would not be over revving the engine. So I think 410 gear set, take a look at all the gears, take a look at whatever the previous owner did with the limited slip. At that same time, install the right pinion flange. And that's one of those things where if you remove it, if I just were to remove it, leave the gears as is, and install a new pinion flange, that crush collar in your rear end is kind of a one-time use, and you crush that and it sets a lot of other clearances and how everything meshes. So me not being an expert, if I were just to come back in and retighten a new flange on there, I'd be guessing at best if I had the right preload on that crush collar, if I was gonna get vibration. So I actually went and bought a book, which I'll show you right here. I'm gonna go through this book and follow a step-by-step process, kind of take my time, get the new rear end, get the 410 gears, get the right style 1350 beefier flange, and then I'm gonna measure and get my new drive shaft. And then once I do that, we're gonna go back to the dyno because while it's probably finished in terms of horsepower, max power, they still need to do the drivability tuning, cold start tuning, so all that stuff needs to get finished. The last thing I'm gonna check is I might see if I can't sneak back on the dyno, remove that 1-inch throttle body spacer because this didn't rev out as high as I thought. Me thinking, I don't think it needed that spacer. I think without the spacer, that RPM air gap intake would have been fine. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I can't remove that and see if I pick up some torque. Even if I lose a little bit of horsepower, if I can pick up some torque down low, to me, that's a win-win. So stay tuned. Sorry this wasn't the video that you were hoping for, but hopefully next time you will get to see it running, driving, potentially even back on the dyno with a much beefier and safer setup. And stay tuned. Thank you so much for liking. Please like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Have a good night.